I am starting to answer some of the questions that have come in for a long time. I've been woefully neglecting the actual questions that I've been receiving over the last couple of years to people that have received my email and maybe they've asked some questions. There's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one, I can't answer all the questions that come in personally all the time, but I want to. And sometimes people will ask me questions that it's not appropriate for me to answer in email because that would be like me just giving advice as a therapist and I'm not taking into account all of what your story includes. However, at the same time, there are a lot of questions that people do want some help or thoughts on, and I think this would be the best way for me to do it is to share it in live videos and then to provide that content for you so that you can maybe it's helpful for you or for somebody else. So today's question is, what's your story? How did you heal from stress and trauma? Basically, I think what people have been asking me, maybe this particular person was asking and wanting to know, how can I heal from stress and trauma? How did you go through it? And maybe is that going to provide some hope for me? I hope so. I think that part of my story includes a lot of aspects that are hopeful for other people. One of the reasons is because my healing didn't happen from one magic pill or one magic thing that I did. And my healing didn't occur overnight. So let me share kind of where I'm coming from when I talk about where my healing journey really began for me and what are some of the steps and the things that I've done over time that have been part of that healing journey that you may want to consider. So please hear me in that my story is my story and yours could be very different. You may need different elements, different things much more. But hopefully, because I've also tried various things, that can be helpful for you in thinking through your options. What is available to you? There are lots of ways that our brains experience healing. In fact, one of those I'm offering through the growth community, Cultivate Together. We're not only learning new information, but we're having experiences that help our brains experience something new, which helps our head knowledge move down to our heart and become something that we live out daily, layer by layer, layer by layer, layer by layer, because there's a lot, right? Okay, so my healing journey, what comes to mind for me primarily is back in 2012, we moved to a ranch. I just call it the ranch. And it's a place that was owned by a foster agency. It was out in the country, 156 acres. And we moved very quickly to do this. We felt like God was nudging us to do something. When I say we, my husband and I felt like God was nudging us to do something. We had some different ideas of what that might look like. So we had a little bit of preparation in our spirit before this came about. But when we saw the news about this ranch looking for people to live there, to take in large sibling groups as foster parents, I just kind of knew. Like I had an immediate knowing in my spirit that we were supposed to do it. I didn't even really actually want to. There was a lot of me that was like, what in the world? This is not what I was planning. This is not what I was thinking. So there was a lot of conflict with me and with God and kind of knowing that really feeling like I should go, sensing that, and at the same time, what in the world? That's not something I would have ever really chosen. Part of my heart is there, but there's other things that are just extra challenging because I'm more of an introvert. I need that quiet space. So we moved to a ranch where we were going to have up to 12 children in our care at any time. Whew. People say, "Oh my goodness, I don't know how you did it," and I have no idea either. I just say that, God sometimes does have seasons of grace for us, I believe, over different things that he asks us to do. That does not mean it is going to be easy. That does not mean it's not going to come without hardship because boy, oh boy, oh boy, did we experience hardship and uneasy things as foster parents. There were a lot of really good things that came out of it as well. And so I don't want to say like this whole experience was really, really bad, but it brought so much stress in numerous different ways. So it was the stress of caring for up to 12 kids, the stress of a foster agency living on the other side of your living room in the same building, the stress of being out in the country, and then there was some spiritual factors that I won't get into today that added to it. And there, I can't even get into the all the details of it, but there was a lot upon a lot. So some of the kids were our biological kids. We brought three biological kids with us. We had a boy that had been living with us that moved down there with us. Then we got a sibling group of five, and then kids started to rotate. So at any point, we had from 5 to 9 foster children in our care at the ranch. We stayed there for 14 months. So that was back in 2012. We left in 2013 at the end of the school year and returned home. We had not sold our home in Texas. And when we returned home, I was beyond depleted. I mean, tears even still come to my eyes as I think about it because it was so beyond exhausting and taxing in so many different ways. Not just caring for kids that had high needs and high, like lots of behavior stuff that was going on, and then navigating the system and the government system and schools that were 15 minutes away on 5 different schools, all the different kids. That was one kind of stress. But then there was that spiritual stress, the emotional stress, relational stress. All of us were stretched beyond our max, and it's just all kind of like bumping against each other. And the thing for me, one of the things that really stood out is that while I was there, I started noticing some things inside myself. And I felt like God was really using this to bring to my awareness some areas that I had that were keeping me held back in my life completely. Like all my years before then, it was fears in my life, ways that anxiety would show up around, particularly people who had authority, people who had a mannerism of authority, even if they didn't actually have authority, or a pride in their spirit where they just knew the answers. I would usually acquiesce and assume everybody else is more likely to be right. That got me in a lot of trouble. Before the ranch, there was other things that I had lived through, date rapes, and I had already struggled with disordered eating and all kinds of different things. And so, being at the ranch was kind of like this uh, everything coming to the surface and shaking together and bouncing off of each other, like chaos, but also revelation for my spirit that there were things inside of me that needed to change. I sensed God saying, "You need to speak to the elephant in the room." And I was like, "Me? Are you kidding me? I don't like conflict. I don't wanna tell anybody anything that's gonna make them upset with me," or and I was so afraid of it. And then at the same time, there was sometimes when I would speak up a little bit here and there when I felt it was more like when God would give me some kind of spiritual strength and I would just speak directly a truth that needed to be said. But I was more likely to acquiesce and to stay back. So that was one of the big things that started to come to my awareness while I was at the ranch. Then when we came home and all the children had the foster children had eventually departed within a month of us coming home. So now we were down to well, actually within a couple months we were down to 2 children in our home. And I was not functioning very well. I had significant depression, anxiety. I just there's so much had been overworked and my entire nervous system was just shutting down and really, really struggling. My brain was so clogged and muddy that when I would read a book, I love reading. I used to run a nonprofit library. When I would read a book, though, I would read maybe a sentence, maybe 2, and immediately switch to Facebook or something because my brain couldn't handle it. It was so hard to focus, and that was an effect of trauma, high intense stress and trauma. So, I would sit in a couch, in the mornings or I'd lay in bed, whatever, and I wanted to read, so I was trying to read, and I would get through some books. I kinda kept pushing through and would, read books about suffering and about God's work in us, when we're hurting, and that ministered to my spirit because I had so much pain and hurt and fear and anxiety inside of me. Other people didn't really know what to do with me, and, I didn't want just, like, sympathy, "Oh, like, poor you." I wanted people who could sit with me, and as I was praying and talking with God, I sensed in my spirit God saying, I just was sensing, I don't want to just heal from the effects of the ranch, what we experienced at the ranch, even though that was extreme, that was intense, that was a lot. I don't want to heal just from that. I want to heal from all these fears and anxieties that kept me hiding from other people, kept me from using the gifts that God has put inside of me, that kept me from leaning into things that felt too risky, but would have given me great um, experiences, or like maybe I needed to fail in some areas that I could experience a growth and learning something new so that I could actually try and use it more. I didn't want that anymore. And so I said, okay, God, let's go. Ooh, inside of me, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is gonna be tough. This is gonna be really hard." I don't want the pain that comes with, facing the things inside of me that aren't good. I don't want to do some of these things that I know that I probably need to do, that would be helpful for me to do, to become the person I wanna be, but it's time. I don't ever wanna be in this place again either. I was so, so down, and I said, "Okay, God, let's go. Let's heal all the things from the past. I don't wanna just heal from the ranch. All the fears and anxieties in me, whatever that looks like." That began my healing journey. So that attitude of the spirit to say, even if that was honesty, I don't really want to go through all this. I don't want to feel all the feelings that come with this. And I'm gonna lean in. Oof, Lord, whatever it takes. I want to trust you. I want to know that you are big enough. I want to believe that you are good enough, that you're gonna continue to be there for me. And I want to know your goodness on the other side of this. So I was doing some reading, like I said, and I think there was a book by David Seaman's called Healing Healing for Damaged Emotions is what it was called. And I think there's a workbook too, but I didn't do the workbook. But that alone, like that title and some of this concept was like, wait a minute, so damaged emotions, like that hurt and that pain. Areas where I've felt something that kind of damaged part of my spirit and kept me from being who I was. Um, in my prayers, I was leaning into the Psalms. I was praying with other people. I was reaching out for support. I was even going to healing ministries at my church. I was like, whatever it takes. I don't know, God. And then there were some things that I would try, like some healing ministries that I would step into. There was things that I did not like, did not feel comfortable with, and had to step back from in those. I have a one of the things that I talk about in and am continuing to talk about is like concepts of hyper spirituality and ways because that actually keeps us from staying connected to God. Totally other topic, but I was leaning into these different things to see what God had for me in there, to be just receptive. So that was more of I just want to receive from you, God, whatever that looks like. And while I'm doing it, help me to stay wise. Help me to have the courage that it takes to do what you've called me to do. Help me to stay wise and not just accept anything that everybody else says. That was actually a big part of my healing journey is I needed to learn that what God was speaking to me, trust that, lean into it. And if I didn't feel comfortable with somebody in spiritual authority or somebody who's teaching a spiritual healing concept even, that God was okay with me stepping back. Saying, "I'm not so sure about that. I'm still humble and ready to receive what you have for me, but I'm not so sure about this thing." So, I stepped back from that, and then I pursued counseling, and somebody had told me about EMDR, and I was like, "What is this?" And they said, "Oh, it's really, really helpful for trauma. It helped me with," they had a single incident trauma that it was really helpful for them, and I was like, "Okay, whatever, let's try it." My first therapist was, not yet trained, but they were going to be, and it was very low cost, and we were in transition from coming back to the ranch and my husband having jobs, so that was really, helpful and important at the time. And then I found another therapist at a center who was trained, and we began some of these, things that I now do with other clients that increase safety, and resourcing and helping me to work with my nervous system to calm down and to even sense God's presence with me in a powerful way. Like not just knowing, okay, God is with me, God is with me. There that doesn't do much for us to, I mean, we need to remind our brains that, but when we actually experience God's presence with us, when we can it's like EMDR was really powerful because I was processing some things and in my brain and my spirit were connecting at the same time and choosing to receive choosing to receive what I was noticing about Jesus present with me, what it looked like, what it felt like, staying with that presence for a little while, even when it felt uncomfortable, because we tend to when we have new feelings that are even these healing feelings, and we have new experiences that it's just we're not used to them, but they're part of the healing experience. We can still push them away really quickly because our body doesn't know that it's safe yet. So by intentionally choosing and receiving, choosing to receive what God had for me, allowing a few seconds at a time, perhaps, Yeah, I can see that. I can still see him in these visual images that I had and let God smile with me in his welcoming presence. And that settles my spirit. That was a part of my journey. And then the EMDR processing that we did, it took a few years, actually a few years, because I would kind of go to counseling for several months and I would kind of wasn't be able to afford it. And then I would kind of go back, or we would work through a set of targets in EMDR. And then I would take a break just because financially I couldn't keep doing it every single week. Um, but then I went to a brain camp put on by a friend of mine. She called it a brain camp, and she used to do these. She doesn't do them anymore, excuse me, but she used to do it where she would bring people in and she would have a EMDR trained therapist, actually someone who's been doing it for years and years, available for the adults, for the couples or single parents, and then and for the kids. And so a lot of the kids were maybe adopted, and they would do neurofeedback and uh, brain maps, I think it was, to identify areas of the brain that may be overactive, underactive, and then using neurofeedback to help work with the brain. And then you had lots of fun, you learned some different things, you got to engage in community and relationship. So that was really great. So I did EMDR sessions while I was there at this brain camp, and it had opened up some anger in me that needed to surface. It was staying hidden. I wasn't allowing myself to be angry with other people, and I was just starting to allow myself to be angry with God. Actually, to acknowledge that I was already angry with God. I started journaling that and getting honest with what I was saying and thinking, and saying, "Yeah, you know what? I am angry, God. I feel like you abandoned me. You sent us down to the ranch and then you left us alone." Ooh, it was hard to say that because God is God and who am I? And that was all the framework I had in my brain for my connection with God was just that I'm like this peon. I can't dare to say anything until I started thinking of God a little bit differently, that he's a big God. He's a really big God. And guess what? He can handle the honest truth. And he actually wants the honest truth from us, our honest thoughts, our honest feelings. And so I said, okay, I'm shaking a little bit. I'm actually going to write this down. I'm angry with you, God. I'm angry because of this, this, and this. So anyway, at the after the brain camp, when the anger started to surface, I was having a hard time settling it down because a lot of the anger was coming out. I wasn't sure what to do with it. And so I went back to my regular EMDR therapist and we continued working through some targets. And it seems like what the target we were working on was completely unrelated to the result that I had. But that's part of what happens with EMDR is there's a lot of things that are connected inside of our brain that we don't really realize it. They're tied to core experiences, core beliefs, and that's what an EMDR therapist is going to help you kind of identify. But for today, I want to share that after one of my sessions, it was about a week later where I realized, and I hadn't noticed necessarily huge shifts yet in EMDR, but it was about a week later that I had a situation like it was a relational dynamic, like me with another person, where in that dynamic, based on either it was body language or the situation, or something in the dynamic that normally in my past, all the way up until then, I could feel shakiness inside of me. I felt really insecure and afraid. There wasn't actually a real threat to me, but I felt a lot of fear. Um, it disappeared. It was completely gone. I would take responsibility so much for other people's responses, for their thoughts, their emotions, their whatever. If they were angry at me, it had to be my fault. That responsibility all of a sudden in this situation, I noticed it was completely not even there. And so I started experiencing that more and more and allowing myself, again, that intentionality in choosing to allow myself to go into some different situations that maybe weren't too scary, but just enough that normally would bring up that anxiety so that I had more and more experiences of actually being okay, saying no, setting limit, or even saying something like, "Yeah, I hear that. That sounds really distressing, and I'm not sure that I understand that, but can I share my viewpoint?" Something like that, where I can actually engage in this dynamic back and forth that considers the other person, and then allows space for me to be fully me. So those were some of the areas of growth. And along the way, before brain camp, I had been writing, so I was doing a lot of writing to kind of work through my thoughts and work through some of the pain and it just this deep connection with God and the way that He was speaking to my heart. So a few different things actually happened. Going back to the early stages after I had been praying with God and He would reveal certain things to me that felt like maybe a specific next step. So, for example, I might be just not feeling safe enough to even go to church right now because I don't want to be around people because that was what was, something that was really challenging at the time. So maybe I would find smaller events to go to, or I would allow myself to go and go for a short period of time. So maybe I felt nudged by the spirit that specific way so that I could lean into something that was a little bit challenging and experience something new. That's just one example, but there's a lot of different things that the spirit was revealing to me as I was engaging with God. And then I would read about them. And the books that were being written were by men, Christian theologists, psychologists, and pastors. And but I was also starting to fine tune my writing into this same kind of niche, this world around emotional health, spiritual growth, and actually really deeply connecting to what's going on inside of us so that we can be more deeply connected to God. Because I had grown so tired of the fake smiles and the pretense, and that's one of the things that we dealt with too, in scenarios around the ranch where there was just big smiles, big visions, big talk, but not connection, not true care for what's going on to the heart of the person and what support they need, meeting someone where they're actually at. I felt that deeply. And we had been through some other situations or past church experience, et cetera, that hadn't been the first time I'd experienced it, but I was tired of that. And so through my healing journey, just I wanted to reflect more and I wanted God to speak to those places. I didn't want to be alone and I couldn't find people. I had some good friends. I don't want to say I didn't have any good friends, but it was still challenging. It's challenging for people to sit in that space. That's one reason we have therapists because therapists are trained and hopefully skilled in being able to sit with you in that space in a way that actually helps you have some brain shifts in the process. That's what I think. That's what I like to offer my clients. So while I was doing this reflecting and kind of really deeply engaging with God, then I reached a point a few years after we came back from the ranch where I just couldn't write anymore. My brain was really stopped up and so I thought there was still this creativity bug inside of me, and there were still these questions that I wanted to ask myself, especially during the year. So it was at the end of the year, it was around Christmas time, and I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll just create a planner. I have fun looking at planners. I could just have fun dreaming of what if I created a planner? What would I include if I had a planner? Okay, so I'm looking at all these different planners and I'm looking at things like Power Sheets by Erin Condor, where they're asking all these questions. Okay, well, I like those questions, but a lot of these just feel really vague and they're not the area that I want to go into. Um, Mine were more self reflective about what's going on inside of me and then bringing that before God. So I started kind of highlighting what are some of those reflective questions. How in the world would I put that in a calendar? I couldn't figure that part out because it just was like deeper questions. And if you did a little bit here and a little bit there, it just didn't feel like it was flowing really well. So anyway, I thought, well, maybe this is something different. I don't know what this is, but maybe it's something different. So I started kind of moving things around and realized, okay, I'm going to call this Unleash Heart and Soul Care Sheets. So it's a tool that you would print out. I have it available today. I've just recently redone all the videos and have a brand new hub for that. If you're interested, a place for you to get the tool and the videos, it's hub.unleashsheets.com. Hub.unleashsheets.com. So I created Unleash Heart and Soul Care Sheets. I didn't know that's what I was creating, but I started putting these boxes together with the questions that I had and fleshing out this concept more as I was responding to the Spirit's leading. I even had these boxes. So when you see the layout, you'll see like there's a question, there's a box, a question, and a box for writing your answers in. And I sensed the Spirit say, no, 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 that should be over this way. Do it this way. And then I said, okay. After I felt like the Spirit had led me to kind of change some things up, and it was now 2 pages, well, I'm gonna test it out. So I tested out the tool and wow, that was actually really helpful. Just guided me through some of the things that I found confusing or a way to process thoughts that I had or nudges that I sensed were possibly coming from the spirit, but I wasn't sure, or emotional overwhelm that was going on inside of me, deep pain, etc. And so I was doing this for myself and regularly trying it out. I said, okay, I'm going to try this with some other people. I got a beta team together that tested it out. And then we had a gal that used it with, I don't know, a couple hundred teenagers, 13 to 14-year-old teenagers in a boot camp, and just overwhelmingly positive feedback. So I continued to fine tune the tool and finally released it. Gosh, I don't know. I don't remember what year it was in, but I've just really re-released all the videos. So it might have just been a few years ago, re-released all the videos, and the tool as it is still really helpful. I will use it kind of periodically, either just as a check-in for myself or as things are getting stirred up inside of me, or when I'm starting to notice um, what I thought was an old pain, something that I thought had already been dealt with and healed, processing it with God through Unleash Sheets. And then all of a sudden, I'm aware of other emotions that are tied to it or other thoughts that are tied to it, or God is speaking to me about something and He just brings another layer of healing. And man, that's just powerful. And so that has been an incremental piece. Going back to the original question, what did you do to heal from stress and trauma? Let's see what I've already talked about. So I've talked about reading some books, information that helped validate the intensity and the pain and the suffering, validate that there could be healing and growth. They felt affirming for me and gave me hope. So there were books that did that and some workbooks. Fellowship with other believers, those who actually would receive my texts, maybe some long texts or just when I was feeling really, really down, they could receive it. They would pray with me. Maybe they didn't know what to say, but they wouldn't tell me just what to do. They were safe for me. They weren't somebody who was trying to fix everything. They allowed space for me to be me. That was huge. Having that space to just explore and have my doubts to wonder and to explore things without somebody else telling me, "No, I think you're wrong. You got to do it this way." No, we need that space to explore with God. I love offering that to my clients. I have a lot of clients that are coming from church hurt scenarios, cultic churches, spiritual and oppressive situations, whether in church or a relationship, spousal relationship, partner relationship, parent relationship. I love being a place where they can explore. I find a lot of people who want to be anchored in God. So they want somebody who has strong faith in God, but isn't going to tell them what they need to believe or tell them, here's the verse that you need to memorize today. Now go focus on that, and then I'll meet you next week. I'm not going to do that. Another thing that came about with Unleash Sheets actually is there's a spot for scripture in there. Um, but I started realizing as I was processing this, when I'm engaging with God through the process of Unleash Sheets and a scripture comes to mind, and then I'm the one that's writing it and I'm drawing it out. I'm engaging with God and kind of asking him, what does he have to say about this? Or what does he want me to know about this verse or this section of verses or these different types of verses, all on different one concept, for example. That was powerful. That was me having an experience with God that couldn't be taken away from me. So vastly different than somebody else who kind of knows some of my story and then says, count it all joy, go do this, and trying to tell me to pray more or know that scripture. That's not what God does. God meets us in our hearts. And his word that's alive and active is meant for each of us personally and individually. So let's see, going back to the list of things, that was definitely, some of the reading. It's a lot of an intentionality and prayer, praying with God, for me, because I was also bringing connection, helping me know that I wasn't alone. I didn't know where else to go. Sometimes when I was in deep depression, the only thing that I could pray was barely getting out the word Jesus or thinking Jesus. I would try to just go, Jesus. If that's all, he knows our hearts. If God knows my heart, he knows all the things that I can't even verbalize. Because here's the thing that happens with stress and trauma, there's parts of our brain that don't function properly. Makes sense, right? There's actually a verbal part of the brain that doesn't I I Wernicke's and Broca's areas of the brain. There's one where we're actually saying words, or I forget exactly how they work. But the point is, trauma and stress affect these to where we can't even verbalize our story. That is one reason that some people will struggle to give you any words, or they might say something, but it's not quite descriptive or appropriate for that trauma they just experienced, or maybe they're repeating. Their brain is trying to assimilate and engage all the information, and it's struggling to connect all those pieces in the brain. So, talking with other people who can just sit there and listen, super powerful. Praying with God who's not going to correct my words and who can even understand the depths of my heart with me saying hardly anything, hugely helpful. Settling my nervous system and knowing I don't have to have the perfect prayer. I don't have to have all the right words for God to see me, to know me, to show his love to me, to make a difference in my healing journey. I don't. He knows my heart. He says that in scripture that he knows our heart. So I chose to believe him at his word. Um, and then also talking with a therapist, and a therapist who validated and confirmed, like affirmed me as a person, validated that I'm not crazy, that these are challenging experiences, and why this would be confusing, or why I might feel off kilter over here, or just validating that that was a reality in my experience, and not correcting me. And so it's the people in the relationships, it's the value of getting the words out, experiencing being known, and having that safe place to process. And then on top of that, there are some other things that are on a practical level of that affect our physiology, right? I started finding some supplements. Now, I had used a company back then. I don't know that you can use it without a doctor anymore. And I can't remember what it was called, but it was a company that would test my neurotransmitters basically in the brain so that I could know, well, I've been affected by significant stress. That changes the brain chemistry. What areas of the brain or what type of neurochemicals in the brain are being affected, and where might a supplement be beneficial? So I was doing some research on that and try some different supplements to see what would help me have more energy, to think a little more clearly, to have less signs of depression, and trying to go out just even for some small walks. Sometimes it was as far as up and down in front of our house a couple of times. That was as much as I could do, but I knew I needed that activity. My body needed that activity. So I wanted to do as much natural as I could. This goes to the question of, do you take drugs or not? It's a very personal question. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. I'm going to tell you how I process that choice. Um, I wanted a quick fix solution. I wanted something that was gonna say, "Okay," somebody who could look at my brain, say, "Here's a specific thing that you're low in. Here's a drug to fix that, and now you can move forward." But then I also knew the reality of what a lot of my kids experienced who had been on different psychotropic meds, and as their medications were being changed, because the we're get a lot of times they're guessing, well, maybe this one will work, but we're not sure how it's gonna affect some people. It affects differently, different types of depressive meds. So I knew in some cases it could be really, really helpful. I would have totally benefited from it. And at the same time, I had my own concerns of seeing some of the changes, how many weeks it took for the drug to take place, what the outcome was for that particular person. And I've seen it kind of go up and down. And I didn't feel like I had the bandwidth for that. And really the support that I needed for that at the time. So I was struggling with that decision. Let's put it that way. I wanted to see, could I do some of these natural things first, and is that going to be enough of a change? Unfortunately, it was, but it did take time. So I don't know that I specifically have that list, but relational support is huge. Um, Information is helpful, but then we also need to apply it, being in places where we can be validated, support for our physiology, our nutrition, all the things that you think of, exercise, water, etc. I took a brain health assessment. I think Dr. Amen does that. You could find out some different supplements there as well. There's lots of different ways that you can find out, based on kind of the signs that you're, like what areas you struggle in. Are you overthinking too much? Are you ruminating on thoughts? Are you, whatever? It can ask you some different questions that can kind of give you an idea of what parts of the brain may be over functioning or under functioning. So that can be helpful. Um, and I'm trying to think if there was really anything else. The Unleash Sheets tool and actively engaging with God and trusting the Spirit. And here's the thing: one of the biggest pivot points for me was like what I was doing with the Unleash Sheets and with the self reflection with God is attending to the different things that God was revealing about me. And I could start to see these patterns, right? So for me, some people have different like fight or flight responses. Some people withdraw more and go internally, and some people go out more, go externally. They project onto others a lot more. They're maybe verbally aggressive or quick to anger or something that's more on that fight response. And mine would be more of that shutdown response, just flight and not wanting to be present. So as I started to notice these patterns in me and what are some of the core beliefs that I'm struggling with, everybody's more likely to be right than me. Um, that's okay for everybody else, but not, like if God says this for some everybody else, but it doesn't really apply to me, certain things that were kind of thematic throughout my life. Then I had an experience with God in prayer where I was crying out and I was basically in this place of saying, I know, in part when I'm reading scripture and all these other things, it's in your will for you to do this and you want people to act this way, etc. Why aren't you doing it? Come on, why aren't you doing it? So I was in that place and I felt God just kind of Jesus taking my tears, pouring them into this lake, like this lake of all the tears that I'd cried before, and then saying, I've given you what you need. Now walk in it. Whew, that was challenging, super challenging. But I was chose to respond and say, okay, now what does that look like? Help me, Lord, because I'm going to need your strength and courage. What does that look like for me to walk in my gifts, my insight, who I am, and not lose sight of stewarding my own life because you gave this to me, Lord. So I hope that's helpful. I know we're all in different journeys and how we heal happens differently. There's lots of unique factors. You may need to be out of certain situations. Like there's only so much that you can do in certain situations. But I hope that this is helpful for you and kind of getting some ideas. And I'd love to hear what's helped you. If you're already on a healing journey or if you've been with one, what has helped you? I would love to hear from you as well because your story may be encouraging to someone else because your story may be different than mine, but maybe more in line with what somebody else needs. Hope that helps, and I will talk to you guys again.